He wasn't there. My boyfriend. He blocked my number.
Did he give you the apartment address?
The last bus left 40 minutes ago. The voice came from a black SUV that had pulled up to the curb outside Incheon Airport's arrivals terminal. The window was down. The driver was Korean, young, wearing a hoodie. The woman sitting on her suitcase outside the terminal didn't look up. "I don't get in cars with strangers at 1 a.m., she said. "That's smart. But this airport closes at 2, and the next transit option is at 5 a.m. You have 3 hours of concrete bench and whatever the vending machine is left, which at this hour is usually warm water and regret." She looked up. He was maybe 30, angular jaw, dark eyes that were doing something she couldn't quite identify, not flirting, not pitying, something closer to the expression of a man solving a problem he hadn't planned on encountering. He wore a black hoodie, no suit, no tie, no driver. Just a man in an SUV at an airport at 1 a.m. who happened to be the only car in the pickup zone. "Where are you trying to go?" he asked. "Seoul." "Seoul is 45 minutes from here. I'm driving that direction." "You could be anyone." "I could be, but I'm the only one here. And you've been sitting on that suitcase for," he glanced at the terminal clock, "about an hour and a half. Which means whoever was supposed to pick you up isn't coming." She looked at the terminal behind her. Empty. The lights were dimming in sections, the airport shutting down around her like a building going to sleep. She looked at the suitcase she was sitting on, then at the second suitcase beside her, then at her phone, dead, because the charger was in the suitcase and the suitcase was under her, and moving would mean admitting she had nowhere to go. "My boyfriend was supposed to pick me up," she said. Not to the stranger, to the air, to the parking lot, to the specific silence of 1 a.m. when the world has gone home and you are the only person who hasn't. He blocked my number. The man in the hoodie was quiet for 3 seconds. "Get in the car," he said. Not a command, not an offer. The specific tone of a man who has just reclassified a situation from inconvenient to unacceptable. "I told you, my name is Junseo. I work in logistics. I was visiting my grandmother outside the city and I stopped for fuel. If you'd like, I can show you my ID. You can photograph my license plate and text it to someone, and I will drive you to any hotel in Seoul that has a front desk open at 2 a.m. She looked at him, at the hoodie, at the SUV, at the ID he was already holding toward the window, a Korean identification card, the name Ri Junseo, a face that matched. She took a photo of the license plate with her dead phone's last 3% of battery. She sent it to her mother in Chicago. Then she got in the car. Her boyfriend convinced her to fly across the world and then blocked her number at the airport. She's stranded at 1 a.m. with 2 suitcases and $47. And the man in the hoodie who just offered her a ride? He owns the airline she flew on. He just doesn't look like it tonight. Subscribe right now, because the 45-minute drive to Seoul is about to become the most important conversation of both their lives. Let's go. 14 hours before the SUV, 14 hours before the hoodie, 14 hours before the most honest conversation either of them would ever have with a stranger. Olivia Kane was standing in an empty Chicago apartment, staring at 2 suitcases and wondering if this was brave or stupid. She was 26, Ghanaian American, born in Accra, raised on the south side of Chicago by a mother who worked 2 jobs and a grandmother who said, "A woman who can draw herself a new life anywhere." Olivia had taken that literally, studied graphic design at Columbia College, graduated with honors, landed a position at a Chicago design firm that paid decently and valued her work. She was good at her job. She was building something. Then Judas appeared on her screen. Judas Osei, 29, Ghanaian American, the kind of handsome that makes you double tap before you read the bio. He slid into her DMs 8 months ago with a comment about a design she'd posted, specific enough to seem genuine, flattering enough to seem interested, calibrated with the precision of a man who had done this before. They talked every day, then called every night, then video called every weekend, always from his apartment in Seoul, always with a carefully positioned background that showed Korean decor and a view of a city he described in detail he had memorized from Google Earth. He said he was a marketing consultant, based in Seoul. Good job, nice apartment, building a life abroad. He painted a picture. Come to Seoul. I've got everything set up. The apartment has a spare room I've already set up as a studio for you. I know designers here who are looking for someone with your portfolio. Just come. He said it the way architects describe blueprints, with enough detail to make the imaginary feel structural. Olivia wanted to believe, not because she was naive, because she was 26 and tired of building alone. The idea of building with someone, in a new city, in a new country, with a man who asked about her fonts and her color palettes and her favorite way to spend Sunday mornings. That idea was the most beautiful thing anyone had offered her. She quit her job, gave notice on her apartment, sold the furniture she couldn't ship, packed 2 suitcases, one with clothes, one with her design equipment, the drawing tablet, the laptop, the color-calibrated monitor she'd saved 6 months for. Her mother said, "You've never met this man in person." Olivia said, "I've talked to him every day for 8 months." Her mother said, "Talking is not knowing." Her mother was right, but Olivia was already at O'Hare. The boarding pass was printed, the plane was boarding, the suitcases were checked. She flew 14 hours on Hanul Air, flight HA 2847, Chicago to Incheon. She landed at 12:47 a.m. Korean Standard Time. She walked through immigration, collected her bags, walked through the sliding doors of international arrivals into the bright, empty terminal. Judas wasn't there. She called him. Voicemail. She texted. No response. She called again. "The number you have dialed is not available." Blocked. She stood in the arrivals terminal at Incheon Airport at 1 a.m. with 2 suitcases, $47 in her U.S. bank account, no Korean won, no SIM card, no address. He had never actually given her the address. She realized this now, the absence hitting her like a door she'd walked through without noticing there was nothing on the other side. And the specific silence of a woman whose blueprint just turned out to be someone else's blank page. She sat on her suitcase outside the terminal. She did the math. The math was not good. Judas Osei was not in Seoul. He had never been in Seoul. The apartment was a set of stock photos he'd found on a Korean real estate website and used as a virtual background. The view of Seoul was a 4K wallpaper. The spare room set up as a studio was a lie wrapped in good lighting. Judas was in Los Angeles. He ran a social media channel, 40,000 followers, ring light in his bedroom, the specific aesthetic of a man who had discovered that outrage generated more clicks than talent. The channel's name was Heartbreak Hustle. The concept, Judas would build online relationships with women, genuine, intimate, long-term connections, and then engineer their destruction in ways he could film, post, and monetize. The ghosting, the blocking, the prank reveal, the reaction content. Olivia was not his first target. She was his fourth. The previous 3 had been long-distance relationships within the U.S., women who had driven to meet him and found empty apartments or been stood up at restaurants. Content that generated modest views. The comments always split, half outrage, half laughing emojis. Olivia was supposed to be the escalation, convince a woman to fly internationally, quit her job, give up her apartment, cross an ocean, and then nothing. No boyfriend, no apartment, no plan. Just an airport and a dead phone and the content goldmine of a woman stranded in a foreign country. At 1:15 a.m. Korean time, While Olivia sat on her suitcase at Incheon, Judas posted to his feed from his Los Angeles bedroom. She actually flew. She's at the airport right now. 14 hours on a plane for a man she never met. The content writes itself. Stay tuned for the airport footage. He didn't have airport footage. He didn't have cameras in Seoul. What he had was Olivia's social media, which he planned to monitor for the inevitable "I got scammed" post that would generate the second wave of content. The tearful explanation, the reaction videos, the engagement farming from her trauma. Her pain was his business model. He was in bed by 2 a.m. Pacific time. He slept well. He was never in Seoul. The apartment was a virtual background. He has a channel called Heartbreak Hustle, where he monetizes destroying women who trust him. Olivia is his fourth target. He posted, "She actually flew" to his 40,000 followers while she sat on a suitcase with $47 and a dead phone. Drop a if you already want this man to lose everything. Subscribe, because the man in the hoodie just pulled up and he has no idea what he's about to drive into. The SUV moved through the darkness outside Incheon. The airport disappeared behind them. The highway stretched ahead, empty at this hour, just headlights and lane markers and the specific isolation of driving through a country at 1 a.m. Olivia sat in the passenger seat with her arms crossed and her suitcase energy radiating the specific frequency of a woman who is too exhausted to be polite and too angry to sleep. Junseo drove, carefully, hands at 10 and 2, the hoodie sleeves pushed up to his elbows, no music. "You don't have to talk," he said. "Good." Silence for 4 minutes. "He wasn't there," Olivia said, because silence at 1 a.m. in a stranger's car is worse than vulnerability when you've been sitting on a suitcase for 90 minutes. "Your boyfriend. He was supposed to pick me up. He has an apartment here. Had. I don't know what tense to use when someone's entire existence might be fictional." Junseo glanced at her, then back at the road. "How long were you together?" 8 months. Online. We never met in person." She heard how it sounded. "I know what you're thinking." "You don't know what I'm thinking." "You're thinking I'm stupid." "I'm thinking you trusted someone. Those are different things. Stupidity is a lack of intelligence. Trust is a lack of information. You're clearly not unintelligent. You were missing information." She looked at him, at the profile lit by dashboard glow, the angular jaw, the calm expression, the specific competence of a man who drives the way some people play chess. "He said he had everything set up," she continued. "An apartment, a studio space for my design work, contacts at Korean firms. He had answers for everything." "Did he give you the apartment address?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "No," she said. "He always said he'd send it closer to the date. Then the date came and he said he'd just pick me up." "Did you ever video call from inside the apartment?" "He showed me rooms, on video. But now that I think about it, the camera never moved naturally. It was always static, like a virtual background." The silence that followed was the specific silence of a woman hearing her own suspicion confirmed by a stranger who identified the con technique in 3 questions. "You've seen this before," she said. "I've seen people who build elaborate structures with no foundation. In my work, we call that fraud. In relationships, people call it love." He paused. Neither version ends well for the person standing on the structure when it collapses. "I was standing on it. I was living on it. I quit my job. I gave up my apartment. I sold my furniture." She laughed, not with humor, but with the sharp, brittle energy of someone cataloging their losses out loud for the first time. "I have 2 suitcases and $47 in a U.S. bank account, and I'm currently in a stranger's car in a country where I don't speak the language, and I have no address and no plan and no—" She stopped. "No plan," Junseo finished. "You said that. But what you have is inventory. 2 suitcases, design equipment, skills, a U.S. bank account with limited funds but access, and a ride to Seoul with someone who knows the city. Inventory is not a plan. Inventory is the beginning of every plan. I run a logistics company. Everything starts with knowing what you have. A logistics company. Yes. That's vague. It's accurate. She almost smiled. Almost. At 1 a.m. in a stranger's car with the rubble of her life in the trunk, something in the way he said accurate, precise, unhurried, the word of a man who doesn't waste language, made her mouth want to do something besides frown. The drive continued. She told him about Chicago, about her mother, about the grandmother who said a woman who can draw herself a new life, about the design firm, about the decision to leave, about the airport. She told him more than she meant to, not because he asked, because the car was warm and the highway was dark, and he drove in a way that made silence feel like space rather than emptiness. And she'd been filling her silences with Judas's voice for 8 months, and this was the first silence that felt clean. He told her less. He was visiting his grandmother. She lived outside Seoul, in a rural area, in a house with a garden and no internet. He visited every 2 weeks. He drove himself on these trips because his grandmother thought men who hired drivers were performing instead of living. What does she think about your logistics company? She thinks I work too much and eat too little and should find a wife before she dies, which she has been threatening to do for approximately 15 years. Olivia laughed. A real one. Small but real. What do you actually do? She asked. In the logistics company. I move things from one place to another efficiently. That could mean anything. It means exactly what I said. The scale varies. You're very good at not answering questions. I'm very good at answering precisely. You're interpreting precision as evasion. She looked at him again. Dashboard light on the jaw, the hoodie, the careful driving, the specific calm of a man who was either exactly what he appeared to be or something much larger wearing a disguise. Thank you, she said, for stopping. My grandmother would have murdered me if I drove past a woman alone at an airport at night. This is less about chivalry and more about self-preservation. Your grandmother sounds terrifying. She raised me. Draw your own conclusions. They reached Seoul at 1:47 a.m. The city was still alive. Neon signs in Hangul, the warm glow of convenience stores, the specific energy of a city that doesn't fully sleep because it has too much to do. Junseo pulled up to a hotel, not the cheapest option on the block, a mid-range business hotel with a clean lobby and a front desk that was still staffed. This place is decent, he said, quiet, safe. The neighborhood has good food within walking distance. I can't afford. Don't worry about tonight. Worry about tomorrow. Tonight you need sleep. He got out of the car. He walked to the front desk. He spoke to the clerk in Korean, rapid, efficient, the specific tone of a man who's accustomed to making arrangements. She couldn't hear the details. She couldn't see the credit card. He came back. Room 407, they'll hold your bags. Checkout isn't until noon. How much? We'll figure it out later. Here. He handed her a card. Handwritten, a phone number. If you need anything, call this number. Someone will answer. Someone? Someone who can help. She took the card. She looked at the number. She looked at him. The man in the hoodie who had driven 45 minutes, checked her into a hotel, and was now handing her a lifeline written on cardstock that felt more expensive than her entire suitcase. Thank you, Junseo. Get some sleep. Seoul looks better in the morning. Most things do. He got back in the SUV. He drove away. She stood in the hotel lobby with 2 suitcases and a phone number and the specific, disorienting warmth of having been helped by someone who asked for nothing. She went to room 407. She slept for 14 hours. She woke up at 4 p.m. the next day, disoriented, a hotel room, Seoul. The events of the previous 24 hours arriving in her brain in the specific order that maximizes pain. The flight, the airport, the suitcase, the blocking, the car, the hoodie, room 407. She called the number on the card. A man answered, not Junseo, older voice, military cadence. Miss Kane, how can I assist? Who is this? My name is Sergeant Yoon. Mr. Ri asked me to ensure you have everything you need. Mr. Ri, the gentleman who drove you last night. His name is Junseo. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Ri Junseo. How can I help? She didn't unpack the formality. She was too tired. I need a SIM card, and I need to find a co-working space with reliable Wi-Fi where I can use my design equipment. I can arrange both. Shall I have them delivered to the hotel? Delivered? Mr. Ri's instructions were comprehensive. Within 48 hours, Olivia had a Korean phone number, a co-working space membership at a design hub in Hongdae that Sergeant Yoon happened to know had a free trial, her design equipment set up at a desk by a window, 3 freelance projects from her old Chicago contacts who were happy to work with her remotely. She was working before the end of her first week in Seoul. She was not waiting for rescue. She was not sitting on a suitcase. She was the woman her grandmother described, drawing herself a new life in a new country with the specific determination of someone who has done the math and decided that inventory is enough. The hotel room became the hotel room she paid for by day 5. She had asked Sergeant Yoon to send her the bill. It was suspiciously reasonable. She suspected subsidy but couldn't prove it and was too practical to argue with affordable housing. She and Junseo texted, not romance, at first, logistics. Him. Did you eat today? Her. I found a convenience store. I'm surviving on kimbap and determination. Him. There's a restaurant 2 blocks from your co-working space. The owner makes the best jjajangmyeon in Hongdae. Her. Is that a recommendation or a command? Him. Logistics professionals don't command, we optimize. The text became longer. She told him about the designs she was working on, a branding package for a Chicago startup, a UI redesign for a Korean app developer she'd found through the co-working space. He asked questions about color theory and typography, with the specific curiosity of a man who runs a company where visual presentation matters and has never had anyone explain why. He told her about his work, meetings, projects, buildings his company was involved with. He sent her photos of construction sites and asked her opinion on signage design. She sent him color palettes. He sent her architecture renderings. She sent him a photo of a terrible cup of coffee from the co-working space. He sent back, "That's criminal. I'll send you coordinates for better coffee." The coordinates were for a cafe that, she would later learn, he owned. They met again 2 weeks after the airport, at a street food market in Myeongdong. Saturday evening. He was in the hoodie again, the same one or an identical one, she couldn't tell. No suit, no car. He walked up to the tteokbokki stall where she was standing and said, "The one 3 stalls down is better. This one uses too much gochugaru." You're a food critic now? I'm a man with opinions about chili flake ratios. That's not criticism. It's standards. They walked through the market. They ate tteokbokki from the stall 3 down. He was right, it was better. She burned her tongue. He laughed. She had never heard him laugh. It was a sound that didn't match the angular jaw or the careful driving or the "I work in logistics" precision. It was warm and surprised and slightly awkward. The laugh of a man who doesn't do it often enough and is out of practice. Something in her chest rearranged itself. "You should do that more," she said. "Eat tteokbokki?" Laugh. He looked at her. The market lights, neon, warm, the specific colorful chaos of a Seoul night market, lit her face. She was not the woman from the airport. That woman had been sitting on a suitcase with $47 and a dead phone. This woman was standing in a night market with tteokbokki sauce on her lip and an opinion about chili flakes and a design career she was rebuilding in real time. "I'll work on it," he said. She wiped the sauce from her lip. He watched her do it. He didn't look away. 3 weeks after the airport. Olivia was walking through Gangnam on her way to a client meeting, the first one she'd booked with a Korean company, a small cosmetics brand that needed packaging design. She was wearing her best outfit, a tailored blazer she'd bought at a Hongdae vintage shop, good jeans, sneakers, the portfolio under her arm. She turned a corner and stopped. The construction site took up an entire block. Cranes, steel framework, the skeleton of a building rising from the ground, and wrapped around the construction fence, a massive billboard. Beneath the text, a row of corporate portraits, the board of directors, men in suits, professional photos, clean backgrounds, third from the left, angular jaw, dark eyes, the man from the car, the man in the hoodie, the man who had opinions about chili flake ratios and drove carefully and laughed like he was out of practice, Ri Jun-seo, chairman. Olivia stood on the Gangnam sidewalk and looked at the billboard and felt the specific vertigo of discovering that the man who bought Baki is the chairman of a construction conglomerate that builds cities. She looked at her phone, at the texts, at "I work in logistics." She called him. 3 rings. "Olivia, I'm looking at a billboard." Silence. "You work in logistics," she said. "I do work in logistics. You're the chairman. The logistics are just larger than I implied." Larger than you implied? You own the company that's building this entire block." "Among other things, yes." "What other things?" "Construction, hospitality, shipping." A pause. "Aviation." Her legs stopped working. "Aviation. My family's company is the majority shareholder of Hanul Air." "Hanul Air?" "Yes, the airline I flew on. Flight HA-2847, Chicago to Incheon, yes." The Gangnam sidewalk, the billboard, the portrait of the man in the suit, the memory of the man in the hoodie. "I flew across the world on your airline to meet a man who doesn't exist, and the man who drove me home from your airport owns the airline. The universe has a specific sense of humor. I prefer to think of it as infrastructure working as designed." "Infrastructure working as—" "Olivia." "What?" "I should have told you, I know that. I omitted the scale of what I do because the night we met, you were sitting on a suitcase because a man had lied to you about everything. I didn't want to be the second man that week who made you feel like you were being managed." She was quiet. "I wanted you to talk to me," he said, "not to the chairman of the regroup, not to the man on the billboard. Me, the man in the hoodie." "You drove me home in a hoodie." "I was visiting my grandmother. She thinks suits are for funerals and job interviews." "Does she know you're a chairman?" "She knows I work too much and eat too little. That's sufficient for her." Olivia stood on the sidewalk. People walked around her. Seoul moved. The billboard stayed. "I need a minute," she said. "Take as long as you need." "A minute, not 22 months. That reference is suspiciously specific." "I'll call you back." She hung up. She looked at the billboard one more time. At the man in the suit who was also the man in the hoodie, who was also the man who sent her to a cafe he owned and a co-working space Sergeant Yoon happened to know, in a hotel that charged rates that were, in retrospect, embarrassingly subsidized. "Logistics," she said to nobody. She walked to her client meeting. She was late. She did not care. "He owns the airline. He owns the airport. He owns half the buildings in Gangnam. And he drove her home in a hoodie because his grandmother thinks suits are for funerals. She found out from a billboard." Comment below, would you be furious or would you be impressed? And subscribe, because the boyfriend who stranded her, his entire internet career is about to meet a billion-dollar airline's legal department. Jun-seo's security team, now fully engaged because the chairman was personally involved with someone, ran a comprehensive background check on Judas Osei. What they found was worse than a catfish. It was a business. Heartbreak Hustle. 40,000 followers. A content channel built on the systematic emotional manipulation of women. 4 documented cases of long-distance relationship fraud, each one engineered to produce content from the victim's pain. The research team found the post from the night Olivia landed. She actually flew. She's at the airport right now. They found the follow-up videos, Judas in his Los Angeles bedroom, ring light on, talking to camera about the Korean experiment and how he'd convinced this girl to fly 14 hours for a man she'd never met. They found the comment sections, laughing emojis, "You're a legend," "Do the reveal" video, the specific ecosystem of cruelty that sustains content built on someone else's suffering. Sergeant Yoon delivered the file to Jun Seo on a Tuesday morning. Jun Seo read it in his office. The suit, the desk, the Seoul skyline behind him. The man on the billboard, not the man in the hoodie. He read the post. She actually flew. He read the comments. He closed the file. He called the chief legal counsel of Hanul Air. The passenger who flew from Chicago to Incheon on flight HA-28473 3 weeks ago was the victim of a coordinated social media fraud scheme. The perpetrator used our airline, our branding, our flight number, our service as a component of the scheme, directing the victim to purchase a Hanul air ticket as part of a fraudulent arrangement. I want a civil suit filed on behalf of the airline against the content creator for reputational damage, fraudulent misuse of our services, and tortious interference. The legal counsel paused. Sir, the defendant is a social media creator with 40,000 followers, and we are a billion-dollar airline. File it. The suit hit like a meteor in a swimming pool. A billion-dollar Korean airline versus a man with a ring light. Hanul Air's PR team released a statement. Hanul Air has become aware that a social media content creator orchestrated a scheme to strand a passenger at Incheon International Airport as part of a social media fraud operation. The creator directed the victim to purchase a Hanul air ticket under false pretenses, using our brand and services as instruments of psychological manipulation. We are pursuing legal action and have provided full support to the affected passenger. The statement went viral, not because of the airline, because of the scale mismatch. A content creator with 40,000 followers being sued by a company with a fleet of aircraft and a legal department larger than his entire subscriber base. The internet, which had been split between outrage and laughing emojis on Judas's original post, unified against him. His heartbreak hustle content was re-examined. The 4 previous victims were identified. They spoke out. The pattern, charming, manipulating, ghosting, monetizing, was documented by journalists, TikTok creators, and the specific internet justice system that destroys people faster than any court. His platform suspended his account pending investigation. His ad revenue was frozen. His 40,000 followers became 40,000 witnesses to his own destruction. The civil suit sought damages, not massive damages. The airline didn't need the money, but the legal process required Judas to hire an attorney he couldn't afford, appear for depositions he couldn't skip, and explain, on the record, under oath, why he had convinced a woman to fly across an ocean for entertainment. The man who had been in bed by 2 a.m. Pacific time, sleeping well, was now sleeping very poorly. Olivia saw the videos. Jun Seo showed her, not to hurt her because she deserved to know. She watched herself described as content, watched her trust monetized, watched the laughing emojis. She was quiet for a long time. He never existed, she said. The man I talked to for 8 months, he was a character. I was a plot point. You were a person who trusted someone. He was a person who monetized trust. Those are not equal moral positions. I feel stupid. You feel betrayed. Those feel similar, but they're not. Stupid is a permanent condition. Betrayal is an event. Events end. She looked at him, the man who had said, bad situations end, with the same precision he said everything. Not comforting. Accurate. The airline is suing him, she said. Yes. Your airline is suing the man who tricked me into flying on your airline. Infrastructure working as designed. She laughed, through the anger and the humiliation and the residual absurdity of discovering that the man who drove her home in a hoodie owned the airline she flew on and was now using that airline to legally dismantle the man who had used that airline to psychologically dismantle her. "You're insane," she said. "I'm thorough. There's a difference." They had the conversation, the real one, at the cafe he owned, the one he'd sent her coordinates to on her third day in Seoul. She'd been drinking coffee there for 3 weeks without knowing the man who recommended it also owned it. "You sent me to a cafe you own. It has good coffee. You checked me into a hotel you subsidize. It has clean rooms. You directed me to a co-working space that Sergeant Yoon happened to know. Yoon knows many things. Jun Seo. Yes? Why didn't you tell me?" He was quiet. The cafe sounds, espresso machine, murmured conversation, the clink of cups, filled the space between them. "Because the night we met, you had just been destroyed by a man who performed a version of himself that didn't exist. You flew across the world for a performance. I didn't want to give you another one. So you gave me a hoodie. I gave you the version of myself that my grandmother knows, the one that drives his own car and eats at night markets and doesn't know how to make good coffee despite owning a cafe." "That's the real version?" "That's the version that stopped at the airport. The chairman wouldn't have stopped. The chairman has a driver and a schedule and a security protocol that doesn't include picking up strangers at 1 a.m. The man in the hoodie stopped because his grandmother's voice in his head said, 'You will not drive past that woman.'" She looked at him, at the face she had seen on a billboard and in a car and at a tteokbokki stall. The same face, different costumes. But the eyes were the same, careful, focused, the specific attention of a man who is trying to do the right thing and isn't sure what that looks like because his profession doesn't usually require it. "I like the hoodie," she said. "I noticed. I liked that you didn't tell me. At the time, in the car, I liked talking to a man who was just a man. I'm still just a man. The buildings are supplementary. The airline is supplementary. The airline is infrastructure. You're the person I want to have tteokbokki with. The airline doesn't eat tteokbokki." She smiled. The full one. The one that had been missing since Chicago, since the airport, since the suitcase. "You're impossible," she said. "I've been told. Usually by my grandmother, sometimes by Sergeant Yoon, now by you. The consensus is forming. The romance built the way real things build, not with grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but with the quiet accumulation of presence." He showed up, not with money or cars or the weight of his name, with himself, the hoodie version, the tteokbokki version, the man who drove carefully and asked about color theory and laughed like he was relearning how. She showed up, not as the woman from the suitcase or the woman who discovered the billboard, as herself, the designer, the woman who burned her tongue on street food and sent him color palettes and told him his taste in signage was structurally sound but aesthetically tragic. She redesigned the signage for 3 of his construction sites. He didn't pay her. She invoiced him. Full rate. He paid the invoice without negotiation because the woman who sat on a suitcase with $47 was not going to become the woman who accepted favors from the man she was falling in love with. That distinction mattered to her. It mattered to him too. 3 months after the airport, Olivia stood in Incheon Airport, not in arrivals, in departures. She was flying to Chicago to see her mother, first class, Hanul Air. She had a design studio in Hongdae, not the co-working space, but her own studio, funded by clients she'd built in 12 weeks of relentless work. She had an apartment in Hanam-dong that she paid for. She had a life. She had Jun Seo. He walked her to the gate, in the hoodie, because he had visited his grandmother that morning and the hoodie was what she approved of, and Jun Seo did not change costumes between the people who mattered. "You drove me home from this airport 3 months ago," Olivia said, "in a hoodie. You own the airline. I own the airline. And you're still wearing the hoodie." My grandmother asks about you, by the way. She wants to know if you eat enough. I eat plenty. I told her that. She doesn't believe men about food quantities. She'd like to assess in person. Is that an invitation? It's a logistics arrangement. She cooks on Sundays. I drive. You eat. The efficiency is optimal. She kissed him. At the gate. At the airport where she had sat on a suitcase 3 months ago with $47 and a dead phone and no plan and no hope and no idea that the man in the hoodie who stopped for fuel would become the man in the hoodie who stood at the gate and made jokes about logistics while his heart was visible in his eyes. She boarded the plane, first class, window seat. On the seatback screen, the Hanul Air logo, the regroup crest. She texted him from the plane, "Your airline has very good legroom." He texted back, "I'll let the chairman know." She laughed. The flight attendant looked at her and smiled because a woman laughing alone in first class is either happy or insane, and this one looked happy. The plane took off. Seoul disappeared below her. She'd be back. And somewhere in Los Angeles, in an apartment that no longer had a ring light, because the ring light had been sold to cover legal fees, Judas Ozzy sat with a court summons from a Korean Airlines legal team and a suspended social media account and a comment section that had turned from laughing emojis to "You deserve everything that's coming," and tried to understand how a woman he'd stranded at an airport for content had ended up in first class on the airline that was suing him. Married to a man who ran the airline, living in a city he'd pretended to live in, building a life he'd pretended to offer. He would never understand. Some men build lies and call them content. Some men build buildings and call them logistics. The difference isn't in the scale. It's in what's left standing when the lights come on. And that is what happens when you strand a woman at an airport for content. Judas built a relationship out of screenshots and virtual backgrounds and 8 months of lies. He convinced a woman to fly across an ocean and then posted she actually flew to 40,000 followers. He thought he was creating content. He was creating the conditions for his own destruction. Because the man who stopped at the airport that night, the man in the hoodie with the grandmother and the opinions about chili flakes, owned the airline. And when a billion-dollar airline decides that your 40,000 follower prank channel used their brand as a weapon against a passenger they now care about personally, you don't get a warning. You get a summons and a suspended account and the specific realization that the internet you built your life on has decided you're the villain of the story you thought you were narrating. But here's what makes Olivia different. She didn't need the airline. She didn't need the chairman. She needed 48 hours and a Wi-Fi connection, and the specific stubbornness of a woman raised by a grandmother who said, "Draw yourself a new life." She was working before the week was over. She was invoicing the chairman of the regroup at full rate before the month was over. She was building before anyone told her she could. Jun Seo didn't save Olivia. He drove her home, in a hoodie, at 1 a.m., because his grandmother's voice in his head said, "You will not drive past that woman." Everything else, the hotel, the coffee, the teokbokki, the airline suing a man with a ring light, was logistics. The love was the 45 minutes in the car when two strangers talked in the dark and couldn't seem to stop. If this story hit different, smash that like button. Subscribe. If you're new, we drop stories this powerful every single week. Comment below. What was your moment? The airport? I omitted scale? The billboard? Infrastructure working as designed? Or I'll let the chairman know. I'm reading every comment. Share this with someone who's ever been someone else's content. Because sitting on a suitcase is not the end of the story. It's the inventory, and inventory is the beginning of every plan. I'll see you in the next one. Don't be late.